What is one rule that was implemented at your school or work that backfired horribly? Story 1. I used to work for a production company that employed a lot of really skilled, award-winning editors. There were producers and executives and directors, but the real moneymakers, the people who really made the company, were the editors. So the company was basically centered around them. The executives would always order food for the editors, and the editors would usually eat in their offices while doing their thing. One day, the executives decided to cut paid lunches to save money. The editors all thought this was a stupid move. So they'd go out for lunch and sometimes stay out for like 3 hours. There was nothing the company could do, really, because these editors were top of their game. And if Warner Brothers heard that the editor they always used had left, they might leave too. So the company couldn't do anything. They saved maybe $15 per person per day, but lost like 4 hours per person per day. When trimming a budget, you want to remove things that are the most expensive and provide the least noticeable benefit. So of course, the first thing to always go is creature comforts, which cost almost nothing and have an immense impact on quality of life. I'm perpetually amazed many companies exist. Companies think they're being smart by cutting corners and pinching pennies, but they don't realize the true cost of their actions. Sure, they might save a few dollars by cutting back on paid lunches, but they fail to consider the impact it has on their employees' morale and productivity. And in this case, they ended up losing hours of work per person per day, which is a huge loss in the grand scheme of things. Story 2. Little backstory, my high school was a teeny tiny rural school, 600 kids in grades 7 through 12. Randomly, at the beginning of second semester my senior year, the new principal, who had just moved here from an inner-city school in another state, decided that we would no longer be allowed to carry backpacks or book bags in the halls between classes for safety reasons. Makes sense in this day and age, but the students were ticked off about this abrupt change in clockwork of our tiny school. Shenanigans ensued after this new rule came into effect, including every student dropping their books in the hallway simultaneously at 10:50 one day. My personal favorite was the guy in my class who decided he would make something that couldn't be called a backpack. First, he took a bunch of belts and tied his books together so they could be carried on his back. That was shut down after day 2. That's when it got hilarious. The next Monday, he comes waltzing in wearing a product of his own design. He made L-shaped shelves from pieces of wood that could be connected to the sides of his legs and proceeded to harness his books to these leg brace shelves. Needless to say, he was pulled from class before lunch. "Sir, my leg shelves, patent pending, are not a backpack." Oh my gosh, this story is hilarious. It's amazing how creative people can get when they're upset about something. I could just picture all the students dropping their books at the same time, causing a loud clattering in the halls. And that guy with the leg shelves, pure genius. This story just goes to show that rules and regulations don't always work out the way they're intended, and sometimes people will go to great lengths to get around them. Story 3. My high school was trying to prevent a senior prank since the class before us had gotten a little out of hand. They basically told us not to have one, that they would get anyone who did anything in a lot of trouble, yada yada. So somebody had an idea. What if we do an anti-prank? The idea had floated around the halls, and everyone knew what we were going to do. For an entire week, every senior was going to bring a potentially threatening item for a senior prank and do nothing with it. The week starts, and that Monday, nearly the entire senior class carries a banana with them to every class. This is a school of about 2,600 students, 650 graduating class. So there are hundreds of bananas being carried through the halls, teachers and assistant principals freaking out. By noon, an announcement was made that all bananas needed to be eaten or thrown away, or they would be confiscated. So by that afternoon, every banana was taken away from the student. The next day got even better. Somebody has the idea that we should all bring a gallon jug of water with us to class. And to no one's surprise, again there is an announcement that they are going to start taking up the water jugs for fear of what we are going to do with them. By this time, the students got creative. People are resentful now and not wanting to give up their precious water. Students are getting creative, hiding them in backpacks, avoiding teachers in the hallways, whatever it took to keep their water jugs. But alas, most of the jugs had been confiscated, so the students start taking to social media. Tons of tweets and mentions are going out to local news stations, TMZ, Oprah, Ellen, you name it, they got mentioned. All of these messages are going out along the lines of, "School is confiscating all water, not allowing students to drink water." Hashtag high school drought 2KXX. Hashtag we're dying. Hashtag send help. You get the picture. Before the end of the day, 2 different news reporters were at our school. Guess we had the last laugh after all. Too long didn't read. School made silly rules to not let us have a senior prank. We anti-pranked them and their rules backfired. Lots of negative press over nothing malicious ever happening. Oh man, this is hilarious. It's always great to see people finding creative ways to subvert authority, and the fact that nearly the entire senior class got in on it makes it even better. And the fact that they tried to confiscate all the water jugs is just ridiculous. But the best part has to be the students taking to social media to get attention for their cause. I mean, who hasn't tried to get Oprah involved in their high school shenanigans? Overall, this story is a great example of how to turn a negative situation into a hilarious one. Story 4. We got a new manager for our office. She was an outside hire and was trying to prove herself quickly, and she was obsessed with efficiency. So her first week here, she sent out this very rudely worded email about employees eating at our desks. We have a very small break area, 4 tables, and we have about 300 employees here, and that we all had to stop eating at our desks because it was not efficient to eat and try to work at the same time. Through a coordinated effort by some of the more sassy people at the office, they all had their lunches at the same time and filled the break room with about 90 people, elbow to elbow, and they all ate standing up. Literally the next day after that happened, she sent out a follow-up email saying that we could eat at our desks, but she advised us to take a break from our work from time to time. It was pretty funny. Story 5. In my dorm, if you did something that triggered the smoke fire alarm, you had to do a safety presentation for everyone on your floor. This was intended to deter pranksters from pulling the alarm. A guy on our floor was making grilled cheese in the kitchenette and burned it, which legitimately triggered the fire alarm. Afterwards, he explained, assuming that since it had been a legitimate alarm and not a prank, that he wouldn't have to do a presentation. He was, of course, wrong. So the next Wednesday night, the entire floor assembled, and we were treated to a 30-minute safety presentation on the dangers of grilled cheese sandwiches. It contained literally nothing about fire safety. It was all choking hazards and cholesterol. Our RA was furious, but the student pointed out that the write-up that he'd been given just said safety presentation. We didn't get any more presentations after that. Oh boy, the dangers of grilled cheese sandwiches? Who knew? I mean, I knew they were delicious, but I had no idea they were such a threat to our safety. I can just imagine the poor guy standing in front of everyone, sweating bullets, as he tries to come up with enough material to fill a 30-minute presentation. Well, you see, the cheese can get all gooey and stick to the roof of your mouth, and then you might choke on it. I guess that's one way to get out of doing something you really don't want to do. Story 6. Our school made it so you couldn't play dodgeball anymore, so what happened was that the gym teachers came up with this new game called Fireball. The rules are there are balls in the middle of the gym, people go on 2 separate teams, and if you get hit, you're out. If you catch a ball, Okay, so it was basically dodgeball. Then Fireball was banned. So now there's this new game called Pinball, which isn't involving the machines, unfortunately, but it's basically dodgeball or Fireball, but there's bowling pins that need to be knocked over as well. I think they just gave up after a while. A+ gym teachers, though. Story 7. Zero tolerance, which means if you are involved with fighting, you will be kicked out. No questions asked. They think it would mean no more fighting. Nope, it means if the bully is beating up a kid, no one would step in for fear of getting involved with the fight and getting kicked out. No one would snitch because it means the bully will target you next, and now you are involved in fighting and get kicked out. It's a dumb policy. I completely agree with you that zero tolerance policies for fighting can have unintended consequences. While the policy may seem like a good idea on the surface, it can actually lead to a more unsafe environment where bullies are free to do as they please without fear of repercussions. We should strive to create an environment where students feel safe to report bullying and violence without fear of retaliation. Story 8. If you violated the dress code policy, you had to wear these really big gray sweatpants or sweatshirts that said DCV in big orange letters. Dress code violation. It became a thing to get caught because they were apparently really comfortable. When the admin finally caught on that people were trying to get them on purpose, they changed it so that you got in-school suspension. Joke's on them for that too. Lots of kids preferred that over being in class. Story 9. A school in my area jacked up the cost of the parking pass. People protested by not buying the pass. Instead, they rode the bus. Funny thing is, the county really relies on juniors and seniors driving because they don't have enough buses for all the students. The parking pass fee dropped. People drove again. Don't ever let them tell you driving to school is a privilege. They need you to drive to school. Story 10. Overtime is paid in free time instead of money. 3 people quit so far. More people planning to. No new hires to be found. It's probably just a matter of time before this shop closes down. Story 11. My high school had a really bad problem with students showing up to class 5 minutes late every day, so they tried 3 different solutions. First, they stopped letting us use lockers. They quickly found out that just meant that nobody brought their books to class. Next, they decided to ban use of the restrooms between class periods. Teachers started complaining about everyone asking for a bathroom pass as soon as class started, so that was abandoned after a week or so. Lastly, one week they made a ton of announcements Monday through Wednesday that all students were to be on time for class. Then on Thursday, they suspended any student who was late for insubordination. Turns out that included half the football team. This occurred right before the biggest game of the year. In a town of 4,000 people, this game attracts about 16,000. So yeah, they gave up on that as well. Sounds like someone in the high school administration department was really determined to tackle the issue of students showing up late for class. But as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And in this case, the road led them straight to 3 failed attempts at solving the problem. Moral of the story? Sometimes it's better to just let things be, especially when it comes to teenagers and their innate ability to rebel against authority. Story 12. My dad was a corpsman with the Marines doing high desert training in the Mojave. They had a big problem with unidentified snake bites. That is, people would get bit but not identify the snake, so it was hard to find the right antidote. So my dad got all the Marines in a room and said, "If you get bit by a snake, bring it back here so we can identify it." Not even a full week later, they had to alter the wording a bit because a Marine was bit by a rattlesnake and decided to bring it back without killing it. This man had carried the snake all the way back to base alive, and the snake decided to let him know exactly how he felt about that by repeatedly biting his arm the entire time. Needless to say, that Marine went home, and they made sure to hold another meeting where they told everyone to kill the snake, then bring it back. Oh my goodness, what a crazy story. That takes some serious courage. Or maybe just a lack of common sense. And the fact that the snake was still biting him the whole time, that must have been excruciating. It's a good thing they had the meeting and clarified the instructions to kill the snake before bringing it back. Story 13. No running during recess. It was made because some kid in the 2nd grade ran and tripped, so for whatever reason, they restricted running for all grades K through 5. Everyone should know that when you ask a 5 to 10-year-old not to do something, that's the next thing they're going to do. They started running in the halls, the cafeteria, the classrooms, and you bet your butt they ran outside. After a week, the teachers stopped enforcing it, and everyone stopped caring. Story 14. I went to a private school for elementary where uniforms were strict. If you didn't wear a belt, you'd go to the principal's office, and he would make you use a shoestring. Well, when he opened the drawer, there were like 6 different colors, and everybody thought it was really neat. So for a short period of time, there were a bunch of kids coming to school with no belts so they could wear their lime green shoestring belts. Story 15. New manager got rid of the sofa in the break room so people couldn't nap on their hour-long lunch break. No one overslept or took advantage, but it was good to have the option on a tough day. Stoner guy started sleeping in other places, including in between walls and in the warehouse. That's when we started losing him and couldn't find him, as he'd go into a deeper sleep and was less likely to be disturbed. He didn't lose his job somehow. That place had a hard time hiring. Well, it seems like the new manager's efforts to prevent employees from napping on the job didn't quite go as planned. Props to the stoner guy. He found some creative solutions to keep up his nap routine. It's always a bummer when a company takes away little perks that make the workday more manageable. In my opinion, there should have been a compromise, like setting up a designated rest area. Story 16. Don't do anything unless directed by your boss. Any deviation from this will result in write-up or termination. This was a very literal directive from upper management that took place after an office incident. Our work is very fluid, and our team alone contained 20 people. Needless to say, productivity hit unfounded lows. Story 17. I'm a programmer. On a previous job, the developers and teams were measured by the number of feature requests they completed. We figured out how to subdivide everything to blow it up into the maximum number of feature requests possible. A manager might request a new report. We'd set up separate feature tickets for create button, make button blue, make button respond when clicked, implement business logic, display results in grid, allow sorting of grid, and so on. We'd subdivide a one-day task into 20 one-hour tasks. Management loved it. Our team looked 20 times as productive, despite deliberately slowing ourselves down with red tape. Story 18. My school banned all balls over a couple of inches in diameter because someone kicked a football through a window during lunch. Most of us that walked home walked past the woods by the golf course and had a ready supply of golf balls as a result. Golf balls were allowed under the new rules due to their size. 3 broken windows in one lunch period later, they weren't. Story 19. Well, it wasn't a school-wide policy, but I had a super witchy French teacher who would constantly hand out detentions for things as inconsequential as walking to the trash can to throw away a piece of paper. She absolutely could not deal with the fact that we periodically might need to actually leave our chairs for a perfectly valid reason. One day she locked herself out of the classroom and nobody would let her back in. Sorry, we aren't allowed to get out of our seats. She had to get the janitor. It's one thing to maintain order and discipline in the classroom, but when you start handing out detentions for things as simple as throwing away a piece of paper, you know you've gone off the deep end. I'm glad this French teacher got a taste of her own medicine when she locked herself out of the classroom and nobody was willing to let her back in. Story 20. My company, as a part of its alcohol policy, said you should not drink for at least 4 hours before coming to work. When engineers got called about production problems over the weekend, they all just had a beer, but could be there in about 4 or 5 hours. My company tried a policy of absolutely no alcohol on site, even for parties, picnics, or anything. It stopped after just a few weeks, when some employees demanded that almost weekly cocktail parties for the directors and important managers be alcohol-free too, or they would report them. Story 21. There was a rule they put in place my freshman year of high school that if you arrived late, that is, after the first bell, you couldn't park in the parking lot. You'd have to park at the gas station down the highway and walk to school, making you even more late. It stopped after 20 or so people intentionally showed up late to school and made a mass exodus along the highway. On top of a lot of parents complaining. I don't get the logic of rules like this. Oh, you're late to class? Well, let's make you jump through hoops to make you even more late as punishment. All this does is that when people are late, they'll just leave instead of dealing with that. It's frustrating to see rules put in place that seem to make things harder for students rather than helping them. I can understand the intention behind this rule to encourage students to arrive on time, but it seems like it had the opposite effect. Glad to hear that this rule was eventually reversed, and hopefully the school was able to find a better way to address the issue of tardiness. Story 22. Work wanted everyone to come in even when sick, so my boss can inspect me if I work or not. Doctor's notes are not accepted, since they can be fake. Vomited on his desk over important papers. No regrets. Story 23. They made a new rule where we had to ask permission to use the restroom during lunch. We all coordinated, and the whole cafeteria would raise their hands at once to request to go. They responded by sending us 2 at a time. We did this for a few days, then changed our procedure to everyone just getting up at once and going to the restroom without permission. They didn't ever officially do away with the rule, but the teachers on duty in the lunchroom eventually just stopped enforcing it. Story 24. My high school put in a policy so that after the 3rd time you were late, you got detention. They didn't change the absent policy. Tardiness decreased by 52%. Absentees increased 83%. Edit, the punishment for missing was nothing, until social services came in.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.